Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti a un nuovo appuntamento con il ciclo di conferenze organizzato dal Museo Egizio in collaborazione con l'associazione ACME, amici e collaboratori del Museo Egizio. Welcome everybody to a new lecture of the series organized by the Museo Egizio in collaboration with ACME, the Association of Friends and Collaborators of the Museo Egizio. I am Paolo Del Vesco, one of the museum curators, and I have the pleasure tonight to briefly introduce the speaker. Sébastien Biston-Moulin is the director of the Egyptology Research Center, ENIM, Égypte Nilotique et Méditerranéenne, jointly affiliated with Montpellier University and CNRS. His main research interests span from the reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III to the chronology of the end of the 17th dynasty and the construction phases of the great Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak and the Temple of Amun-Ra at Armant. For 8 years, he has been part of the permanent CNRS unit at Karnak, and tonight he will take us to Karnak and talk about recent research work on the many modifications and constructions made to the Temple of Amun-Ra by two very important kings, Queen Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III. I now leave the stage to our guest. Please, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Paolo. And I will start by apologies for my PowerPoint presentation, which seems a little bit too heavy for the computer here. So it will be some delays between the slides. I'll try to do the best. First of all, I would like to thank Christian Greco, director of the museum, and Luigi Prada, president of the Association of the Friend and Collaborator of the museum, for their invitation, as well as the museum staff for organizing my visit. To share with you one of the aspects of my work on the site of Karnak, namely the reconstruction of the activities of Queen Pharaoh Hatshepsut and her co-regent Thutmosis III in the main enclosure of the Temple of Amun-Ra. Before turning to the Temple of Karnak itself, a word about Hatshepsut. She is one of the key figures of Egyptian civilization since its rediscovery 200 years ago, mainly because she is a female pharaoh. If it's not the only one, it is indeed one of the very rare cases where the role of king was assumed by a woman in ancient Egypt. Her notoriety is also based on the many remains we know of her reign at Karnak, of course, but also from her funerary temple at Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of Thebes. This funerary temple was the site of the discovery of the most impressive feminine statues of King Hatshepsut, found deliberately broken into several pieces and buried in a pit, such as this one, now restored and kept at the Metropolitan Museum. But Hatshepsut distinguished herself from any other king, not only by being a woman, but also because she reigned together with another king, Thutmosis III. Thutmosis III was the son that her late husband, Thutmosis II, had with a secondary wife. Upon the death of Thutmosis II, like many queens before and after her, Hatshepsut assumed the regency of the young Thutmosis III, who was only a few years old when he was crowned. However, during this regency period, something unexpected happened. After 7 years, Hatshepsut presented herself as king, and a second monarch thus emerged during the reign of Thutmosis III. This dual kingship involved the coexistence of two sovereigns and acknowledged as such during the same period. This joint rule is often linked to the co-regency proposed for the Middle Kingdom. While I won't delve into the complexities of this co-regency, recent studies challenge their validity, with many, if not all, being dismissed. Hatshepsut reigns, which seems to have begun after the first 7 years of Thutmosis III and to have lasted until the year 20 or 21 of this king, therefore remain quite atypical. Yes. What also sets Hatshepsut apart is her adoption of the iconography associated with male kings during her reign. Here you can see two wine offerings, one by a woman in a dress and the other by a man wearing a kilt. However, this representation shows the same individual, King Hatshepsut, undertaking the identical action. Without the explicit mention of the name on royal statues on each scene, one might not easily identify them as depicting the same person. Feminine depictions of Hatshepsut as king, such as this one, are very rare, suggesting a chronological evolution. As she first assumed the role of king, representation initially mirrored the previous image as queen. This image rapidly changed, and soon she began to be depicted with male iconography, the very embodiment of ancient Egyptian king. We must realize that we are dealing here with a political and ideological imagery that has nothing to do with the way Hatshepsut looked like in real life. A compelling example of this fictitious portrayal of Hatshepsut is evident here. On the right side of the screen, you will find two identical representations of rulers, so remarkably similar that distinguishing them would be impossible without the names above. Hatshepsut, portrayed as a male king, shares visual similarity with an adolescent, Thutmosis III, who is also depicted as an adult male king. On the left side of the screen, the drawing from the Temple of Sebbene in Nubia also shows Thutmosis III, who is only a few years old, portrayed as an adult king. This is a good reminder that the Egyptian image doesn't serve as an unfiltered window into the lives of those it represents, as we might wish it to be, but is illustrating a conceptual reality for a specific purpose. In this context, the purpose is not to commemorate an event, but rather to fulfill a particular function within ritual scene. Of course, Hatshepsut is also known for the destruction of her images and monuments after her death, a destruction undertaken by order of Thutmosis III during his autonomous reign. While the chronology of the destruction during the reign of Thutmosis III is still open to debate, his motive is widely acknowledged to be a desire to suppress the memory of King Hatshepsut from his own reign. This destruction affected the representation of the queen, as evident in the scene from the Palace of Maat here, where the image and text of Hatshepsut have been removed, leaving only the representation and names of the deities. As I also mentioned, the destruction extended to the statues. Here is another example from the Temple of dell'Egitto, which has been restored and is also housed in the Metropolitan Museum. But what makes the reign of Thutmosis III truly captivating is that it didn't conclude with Hatshepsut's death. Her co-ruler continued his reign, but he started before she ascended to kingship, for almost 34 years after her death. It was during this period of autonomous reign that this king undertook a great many military expeditions in Asia, of which he left us one of the greatest compilations of his military achievement in the composition we call the Annals of Karnak, of which you can see a sample on the right of the screen. In addition to the destruction, the king also had to deal, during his autonomous reign, with what we might call the architectural legacy of King Hatshepsut, an aspect to which we will return several times during this presentation. Although these two kings lived more than 3,500 years ago, they left us so many monuments and inscriptions that we can form an impressively detailed image of their reign, despite the considerable amount of time that separates us from them. After these few words about Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III, we can move on to the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak. This monumental structure stands as the largest preserved temple in Egypt. For nearly 60 years now, this temple has been methodically studied by the Franco-Egyptian Center for the Study of the Temples of Karnak, a permanent unit of the French Center for the Scientific Research and the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquity of Egypt. The architectural remains unearthed at Karnak trace back to the dawn of the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BC, which is more than 500 years before the reign of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III. Although I will focus exclusively on the main enclosure, the Temple of Amun-Ra itself, the site also extends with a complex to the north dedicated to the god Montu and another to the south dedicated to the goddess Mut. These two secondary structures were also developed, sometimes significantly, during the reign of Thutmosis III and Hatshepsut, but I won't delve into those aspects today. If we look more specifically at the monuments that were built during the reign of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III, we can see that the entire art of the monument, that is more than 80% of the cultic space preserved, was the work of these two kings. This means that they were the ones who determined how the temple should function, and this arrangement remained largely unchanged until the abandonment of the temple during the Roman era. In addition to the structures still in place, I have also indicated here the monuments that were discovered, dismantled, and reassembled by the Franco-Egyptian Center in a space known as the Open Air Museum. In addition to this remarkable architectural work, Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III also commissioned 11 granite obelisks from the Temple of Karnak. Obviously, we won't have time to talk about all these monuments. Therefore, I will focus my presentation on recent fieldwork on several of them that have been the subject of archaeological exploration or epigraphic survey program over the last 15 years to provide new information and highlight the prospects of several of these ongoing projects for the future. The first monument that I will mention is the one known as the Neturei Menu. There is some uncertainty about this identification, but I won't delve into that matter here. The location indicated on the plan reflects its current position, not its original one, which I will address later. This monument is one of the very rare remains from the regency of Thutmosis III by Queen Hatshepsut. On the Neturei Menu, Hatshepsut is indeed never portrayed as king, but assumed the role of the wife of the deceased king, Thutmosis II. Following an Egyptological study, the reconstruction of this monument, primarily made of limestone, took place between 2008 and 2013 as part of the reconstruction project conducted by the Franco-Egyptian Center in the Open Air Museum. The discovery of blocks from this monument reused in the foundation of a later structure of Hatshepsut leaves no room for doubt. It was the queen herself who dismantled this monument, using it for only a few years, presumably to replace it with another building. As expected, for a monument decorated during the reign of Thutmosis III, it portrayed this king making offering to Amun-Ra. What we are looking at here is a fictitious image of Thutmosis III presented as an adult king performing a ritual action for Amun-Ra, even though he was a 5-year-old boy when this representation was carved. This is not unusual for the decoration of a divine temple, most of which appear indifferent to the political or personal realities of the kings they represent, because the purpose of this representation is not to commemorate a specific action or event, but to serve ritual efficiency. However, the scenes of the nature menu reveal something remarkably uncommon and entirely unprecedented. The late king, Thutmosis II, is indeed portrayed in some of the scenes on this monument as if he were the reigning king, even though there are clear indications that these scenes were carved after his death. Even more surprisingly, and with no precedent of any kind, Queen Hatshepsut is also portrayed performing ritual action alone before the god Amun. This depiction does not present Hatshepsut as a king, but before she considered herself as such, at a time when she assumed the role of the widow of the former king and the regent of the new one. Beyond the representation of a woman, the very essence of the officiant is disrupted, as no one other than the king is ever depicted in a divine temple making an offering alone to a god. This uniqueness is exemplified in the inscription of the scene, which states something that probably didn't go without saying by looking at it, namely that Amun has allowed her to make pure offering for him in his secluded place. Alongside the unusual representations of Thutmosis II and Hatshepsut, which we have already mentioned, there are also traces of changes to the decoration. There are indeed clear indications that the name of Thutmosis III was erased from several reliefs where it had previously been carved and replaced by that of his late father, Thutmosis II. Once again, this was unprecedented for the reigning king. Even more notably, the names of Thutmosis III have not only been erased to substitute those of his late father, but another exceptionally significant modification has been introduced. This modification is found in a particularly significant scene, since it's a depiction of the Aeneid granting kingship to a sovereign. But while we will expect the name of Thutmosis III, this scene shows the name of Queen Hatshepsut, even though she was not king at the time when the decor was originally commissioned. The traces confirm that her name is not original, but that it was recarved on the coronation name of Thutmosis III. Therefore, he was the sovereign initially granted with kingship by the Aeneid, as one might expect, for the reigning king. This scene, which has strong political dimension, was therefore later appropriated by Hatshepsut when the decision was made to erase Thutmosis III's name and inscribe her own. As I said before, Thutmosis III erased Hatshepsut's name from a significant number of monuments after her death. But we can see here that it was, in fact, Hatshepsut who initiated this process of erasure and usurpation even before her coronation. There is only one conclusion that can be drawn from the decoration of this monument. The space, which should be entirely devoted to the reigning king for a monument decorated during his reign, was deliberately limited here. It was limited from the first stage of decoration by the inclusion of representation of a previous king, Thutmosis II, a deceased king, and by the inclusion of an individual who was not king, at least at the time, Hatshepsut, who as queen made offerings to Amun. And it was limited in an even more important way later with the changes to the decoration already created in the name of Thutmosis III, erased and replaced by Thutmosis II or Hatshepsut. This erasure is not total, so there is no question of a complete negation of Thutmosis III's statue as king, but rather a limitation of his position. This documentation is therefore particularly interesting in the context of the debate summarized in the two articles presented here on the reason for Hatshepsut's assumption of power as king during the reign of Thutmosis III, of whom she was initially only the regent. Hatshepsut must be credited with this initiative, and it cannot be interpreted as anything other than the queen's desire to be present in this monument on an equal footing with the king and to limit Thutmosis III's place in it even before her definitive accession to kingship. A final word about the areas where the blocks of this monument were reused. 2 blocks were identified in the foundation of the southern obelisk of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III to the east of the Temple of Karnak and are still there, here in red on the photograph. All the other blocks come from the courtyard of the 7th pylon, which is highlighted in green. Based on the 2 blocks found in the foundations of the eastern obelisk, the two locations have been proposed for the Necherei Minu to the east of the Temple of Amun-Ra. Although these spaces are indeed large enough to accommodate this monument, there is nothing other than this block to support this location, and something cast doubt on this proposal. This location would place the monument outside of the Temple of Amun-Ra, which seems rather unlikely to say the least, given its decorative program. Some of you will already have noticed that the nature of the offerings presented in the few scenes I have shown is more akin with the daily divine ritual performed for the god than to the decoration of a monument located at the periphery of the temple. Another location could therefore be suggested. This monument could be placed at the heart of the Temple of Amun, just in front of the Middle Kingdom temple, which is the location of the later Palace of Maat in the name of King Hatshepsut, where it would have been dismantled by the queen herself to build this sandstone monument. If this solution were to be adopted, this would also correspond to the chronology of the destruction by the queen herself that we can reconstruct for the Necherei Minu. I will leave this consideration there to mention only briefly another monument, namely the Red Chapel. Unlike the Necherei Minu, this bark shrine dedicated to Amun dates from the period when Hatshepsut was considered a king, that is after year 7 of the reign of Thutmosis III. As I briefly mentioned earlier, it shows a moment in the reign when the idea of a dual king is integrated into iconography. The two reigning king on a single throne is a concept that stands opposed to the Egyptian idea of the uniqueness of the king. In these representations, Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III share an identical image, and the purpose of this fiction has been interpreted as if this image embodied 2 aspects of the same royal principle. What is certain is that while Thutmosis III is closely associated with the decorative program of this monument, his presence is significantly less prominent compared to Hatshepsut. Indeed, for every 4 representations of the queen, there is only one of Thutmosis III. The only plausible interpretation is that without denying Thutmosis III's statue as king, which she appears never to have done in the preserved documentation, Hatshepsut, who also assumed the role of king, clearly emerges as the predominant figure in what seems to be a completely atypical royal duet. The Red Chapel is also known for a very large inscription referred to as the historical text. This inscription is mostly a first-person narrative by Hatshepsut after she assumed the role of king, outlining the steps of her ascension to kingship. Without going into the details of this text, from its length and its position just above the base, exactly at eye level, it is clear that the queen wanted this account of her rise to the throne to be known. While researchers who have worked on this type of inscription often see it as propaganda, it should above all be seen as a desire to inscribe this event in the annals of history rather than as a legitimation mechanism, the purpose of which would be hard to understand for a king, which was considered as a god on earth. As this monument is fairly well known, I won't spend any more time on it, and I will move on to the third building I want to mention this evening. This monument is the 8th pylon of the Temple of Amun-Ra, which was also decorated during the joint reign of Thutmosis III and Hatshepsut. As part of the project of the Franco-Egyptian Center over the last 10 years, I'm working on this monument with Elizabeth Roux from the University of Oxford and Chiara Salvador, researcher associate in Egyptology at Montpellier. Our goal is to publish the entire decoration, the one carved by Hatshepsut and the modification made to it, but also all the subsequent additions, including the extensive collection of graffiti. While this work is still in progress, I can already share some of the preliminary results of our study. During the reign of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III, the 8th pylon was the southern entrance to the Temple of Amun-Ra. All its decoration was made during the joint reign of these two rulers and was completed during Hatshepsut's lifetime. Although there are numerous pylons at Karnak, this monument is exceptional. Typically, pylons function as transition between spaces. They are essentially monumental gateways. However, during Hatshepsut's reign, this pylon does not seem to have been connected to any walls, although it's challenging to envision it as anything resembling a triumphal arch. I will leave this intriguing detail here and focus more specifically on its decoration. If we look at the pylon from the south, we can see 4 monumental statues of kings. The statue of Amenhotep I predates Hatshepsut and therefore must have originated from another location in the temple and was moved here at some point during or after the construction of the pylon. The one of Amenhotep II, which mentions his son, Thutmosis IV, is a later addition. The 2 statues flanking the doorway remain. Both bear the name of Thutmosis II and mention of his son, Thutmosis III. They are sometimes thought to be statues of Queen Hatshepsut, transformed into Thutmosis II after her death. However, 2 elements contradict this interpretation. Firstly, the name of Thutmosis II and these 2 statues are original and not the result of recarving over an earlier name. This doesn't necessarily mean that the statues were made by Thutmosis II, but that when these names were carved, the statues were already intended for Thutmosis II. Secondly, these statues are of very different size, suggesting that they were probably not commissioned to be used as a pair and likely belongs to different projects. If we also bear in mind that not a single statue of Hatshepsut survived the destruction of her images, the idea of a pylon of Hatshepsut flanked by 2 colossal statues of the queen must be abandoned. If we now look at the pylon without the statues, we will see that its decoration is rather minimal on the south face. Aside from the doorway, there is only decoration for the inner mast and the 2 scenes depicting the smithing of enemies, but the space left empty is quite substantial. If we look briefly at this doorway, we can see that the east jump is in the name of Thutmosis III, with a form of his coronation name that is only used during the reign he shared with Hatshepsut, and that the west jump is in the name of Thutmosis II. This one is pretty heavy. A clear difference in depth of the surface, however, shows that the entire door jump with the name of Thutmosis II has been recarved over an earlier inscription. The lintel with the feminine ending allows to conclude that the door was initially decorated with the name of Hatshepsut. If we now look at the smithing scenes, they bear the name of Amenhotep II, the son and successor of Thutmosis III, and as such do not belong to the original project for the decoration of the pylon. Clear traces of signs, smaller than the current inscription, underneath these two scenes indicate that a decoration existed prior to this addition. In fact, traces of signs are visible on the entire surface of the south face of the pylon. There are also traces of columns with hieroglyphic signs carved in sunk reliefs, which have been erased. Some parts even show unfinished erasure, as the one on the right side of the screen here. We can see that after a first scrape, a second erasure was made to obtain a clean surface. At various points, we also come across areas that were not erased, but which, in some cases, were subjected to armoring. This is what you can see in the three small images on the left side of the screen. The last of them shows the solution of this particular problem. An inscription has been completely erased, with the exception of the name of the god Amun. During the Amun-Ra period, Akhenaten's agent attacked this name of Amun, which appeared isolated on the pylon at the time. This type of erasure of an entire inscription while preserving the name of Amun is characteristic of the inscription of Hatshepsut in Karnak and elsewhere. The work of recording these traces of erased text on the entire surface of the pylon is still in progress and will take a long time due to its complexity. However, we can already establish that the entire softened surface of the pylons bear one very large or several texts dating from Queen Hatshepsut. It is too early to say what can be reconstructed of its content, but we can conclude from the size and position of this inscription that as for the historical inscription of the Red Chapel, Hatshepsut wanted a substantial narrative concerning her reign to be known. As you can see on the north face, almost all of the decoration has been preserved, although it has undergone numerous changes after the Hatshepsut's death. I'm only going to focus on one of these scenes, which is an inscription preserved on the first register of the northeastern part of the pylon. This text shows an original image of Thutmosis I, Hatshepsut's father, giving a speech to Amun that mentioned King Hatshepsut, whose cartouche you can see here. This cartouche was usurped to include the name of Thutmosis II in the place of that of the queen after her death. In this text, carved during the reign of Hatshepsut, Thutmosis I asked Amun to crown Hatshepsut using prayer and even imploration. This text is a bit confusing for us, as it presents Thutmosis I as a deceased king when he makes his speech, making it a posthumous intervention by the queen's father, confirming his approval of her coronation. Although the concept of posthumous intervention may appear unusual to us, it was a common practice in ancient Egypt. In the case of kings, such actions were likely associated with Osiris' post-mortem validation of his legitimate heir, the god Horus. The traces preserved on the surface show that the text was much longer during Hatshepsut's reign than the part preserved today, here in blue, and that the entire area where the Theban triad stands, here in green, was occupied by the text at the time. Once again, this is another specific narrative linked to the queen's acquisition of the statue of king. Although part of it was preserved after the death of Hatshepsut, Unlike the text of the soft face, it was not completely erased, probably due to the presence of Thutmosis I. We can still see that here too the narrative was heavily amended during the reign of Thutmosis III, which, unlike the queen, did not want its content to be preserved in this monumental medium. If the decoration of the queen and its modification are very rich, one point still deserves to be mentioned before leaving the 8th pylon. On this monument from the joint reign, Thutmosis III is not absent, as he is not on any monument from his reign. But his place is incredibly limited, since he is only present on the south and north doorjamb and does not appear in any scenes. Once again, this tells us something about the relative importance of the two kings, and although the queen always made room for Thutmosis III in her own project, the space, as demonstrated here, was sometimes unexpectedly limited. The next monument we are going to talk about is the Temple of Ptah. It is particularly interesting because it was one of the very first monuments to be built by Thutmosis III after the death of Hatshepsut in year 20 or 21 of his reign. We know very little about the Hatshepsut death. What is certain is that Thutmosis III buried her as a king. He therefore did not deny her, at least initially, her status as a king, a statue that he had accepted along with the rest of the kingdom for the duration of their joint reign between year 7 and her death. To come back to the Temple of Ptah, no part of the monument can be linked to the queen. We are therefore looking at one of the first projects of the autonomous reign. This monument now stands to the north of the main enclosure of the Temple of Amun, but this enclosure is much later, and when the Temple of Ptah was built, it was outside of Karnak. This temple and its surroundings area has been the subject of numerous archaeological exploration over the last decade in connection with the issue of enclosures of the Temple of Amun. The temple has also undergone numerous modifications since it was built by Thutmosis III, particularly the door and the pseudo-pylon that preceded, which were built during the 25th dynasty and the Ptolemaic period. Of the original monument, only the part in red here remains. Today, a statue of Ptah can be found in the central room of this monument. The statue is not at its original location, but it was beautifully staged here at the beginning of the 20th century with an artificial roof that provides this optimal lighting on the 21st of June. The decoration of this room shows, however, that it was actually more closely linked to Amun, to whom the back wall of this room is dedicated. In the dedication inscription for the building, Thutmosis III also indicates that the temples belong to Ptah and to Amun. In fact, only the north room is dedicated to Ptah, where he receives offerings from the daily divine ritual, suggesting that a statue of this god was kept here. In the south room of a statue of Sebbene stands today. It was discovered in fragments and reassembled here also at the beginning of the 20th century. It originally came from another monument and was probably part of a group of statues from which Jean-Jacques Riffaut extracted the best preserved one during his excavation in 1917 at the Temple of Ptah, most of which are now part of this museum collection. The decoration from Thutmosis III clearly indicates that the chapel was originally dedicated to Hathor, which also received offerings from the daily divine ritual, suggesting that a statue of the goddess was also kept here. In addition to the epigraphic survey of its decoration, the study of the temple also included an archaeological exploration of its foundation. This reveals numerous limestone blocks of a structure bearing the name of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III. This reused monument was therefore built during the joint reign of these two monarchs between year 7 and year 20 or 21, and was immediately dismantled and reused at the very beginning of the autonomous reign of Thutmosis III. This archaeological exploration also reveals mud brick walls belonging to an earlier structure which is likely the previous temple dedicated to Ptah, and which could either predate the reign or have been linked to the limestone block, although the archaeological exploration on the site has not yet been able to confirm this. The second monument, placed a little after the Temple of Ptah, but also quite early in the autonomous reign, is the Armenu. This monument is the neo-cultic art of the Temple of Amun, built by Thutmosis III after the death of Hatshepsut, to the east of the Middle Kingdom temple. Here is a slightly closer view of the monument, which occupies the entire eastern part of the enclosure of the Temple of Amun. Some areas have been well preserved, particularly the festival hall, or Eret Ib, which is a pillar and column room that has retained its decoration and much of its color. Others, however, suffered greatly, including the most remote areas of the monument, but also the most important. This is particularly true of the area we now call the Botanical Garden, because of its decoration, of which you can see a sample here, but was, from the reign of Thutmosis III, the heart of the monument where the statue of Amun was kept, and therefore the room where the daily offering was made to the god. I mentioned that the Armenu, despite several publications, was still an ongoing project. As you can see on this plan, the part published is in green, while most of the monument is being studied in various projects of the Franco-Egyptian Center. I'm responsible for one of the projects dedicated to the area of the Armenu in connection with the cult of the king, that is, the offerings he received within the monument whose main function is devoted to the god Amun. By associating his own cult with that of the divinity, the king benefits from part of the god's offering to ensure his survival in the afterlife. The first of these spaces in the Armenu is known as the cultic chambers and housed two large statues of the sovereign to which offerings were made. The second is the corridor to the north of the Armenu, which was probably used to bring offerings to the offering table of Amun in the Botanical Garden. 4 niches, which were housing small statues of the king also receiving offerings, have been preserved. And finally, the last of these spaces is the solar sanctuary. It's likely that this room without a roof also had a niche in its eastern wall where a small statue of Thutmosis III could have been placed. The wall of this section of the building were intentionally left without inscription by Thutmosis III, and it was only during the Ramesside period that this wall received decoration. All the names of Ramses III, a king of the 20th dynasty, currently present in this room, are recarved over a previous name and are therefore not original. The Horus name of the king responsible for the decoration remains intact on the lintel of the door. This name belonged to Amenmes, who, as a rival king to Seti II, was also engaged in the modification of the south entrance to the Armenu. If we now look at the plan of the room, we can see that although it was not decorated, it was far from empty under Thutmosis III. A square altar with steps, of which we know a well-preserved example at Deir el-Bahri, can be seen on the floor. This altar was removed by or before amendments. Beside the altar, the monument also houses a calcite offering table with 4 etep signs on each side. In this same room, a granite statue of Thutmosis III was discovered and is now kept in the British Museum. Due to its size, it couldn't be transported through the door, so it was integrated into the hall during its construction. To return to the offering table, it was also too large to pass through the door, and thus it was originally included as part of the room's equipment during Thutmosis III's reign, when he commissioned the construction of the Amenu. More intriguing is the fact that Thutmosis III reused a pre-existing object here. Indeed, with the aid of a new technology called depth maps, we can see deliberate erasure on the tabletop surface. Names and epithets of Amun-Ra can be identified. This indicates that the object initially had decoration, which has been entirely erased, leaving only the name of the god. As we saw earlier, this type of erasure is characteristic of the monument of Queen Hatshepsut, as she is the only king whose entire text could be erased while preserving the names of Amun. The calcite table of the solar hall is therefore an object from Hatshepsut, which was originally located in another monument at Karnak before the construction of the Amenu. Thutmosis III had it transported and refurbished, removing references to the queen so that it could be incorporated into his new monument. This object will serve as transition to the third monument from the autonomous reign that we will be looking at, which is the Contra Temple of Thutmosis III. It is one of the monuments on which I'm working with Christophe Thiers, also from the Egyptological Research Center of Montpellier, as part of the project of the Franco-Egyptian Center. This is a fairly small building, which, as its name suggests, stands at the back of the Temple of Amun. The Contra Temple is not an independent structure, but a monument integrated into the masonry of the enclosure wall of the Temple of Amun-Ra, also built by Thutmosis III. It has been the subject of numerous modifications during the Ramesside period. It was also extended more than 1,000 years after its construction and just before the conquest of Egypt by Alexander under the reign of Tenktanebu. And this temple also received one of the last hieroglyphic inscriptions from Karnak, carved in the name of the Emperor Domitian. I won't go into the details of these changes in this presentation, but instead I will concentrate on the monument as it looked during the reign of Thutmosis III. If we look at its structure, we see a monument built around a monolithic dyad in a house, shows here in blue, which is framed by the two eastern obelisks of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III in pink here. These obelisks therefore predate the construction of the temple. The lower part of their decoration was in fact hidden by the construction of the Contra Temple. The statues on the naos are monolithic objects made of hard limestone. Numerous scattered blocks have been preserved, allowing to restore a height of around 5 meters to this statue. The identity of the figure to the north is given by the inscription on his belt, which clearly identifies Thutmosis III. The identity of the figure to the south has been debated several times, mainly because its belly, which has clearly undergone considerable modification, as can be seen here, has an appearance that could be described as feminine or feminizing. It has therefore sometimes been suggested that the statue could have been that of Hatshepsut, and that the royal pair could have been represented here, or that a female deity, Amunet for instance, the female counterpart of the god Amun, could have been represented here. But looking at the statue from above shows beyond a doubt that its current appearance is the result of a restoration. The belly of the figure to the south, here on the right, has clearly been cut into the thickness of a previous representation. The legs and feet of the statues have been carefully removed, not by Akhenaten and agents, but so that replacement part can be incorporated into the statue to restore it. Elements of this type are known, for example, for this granite dyad of Amenemhat I and Amun, which was also restored with this technique after the destruction of the Amarna period. There is therefore no reason to doubt that the statue on the limestone house was indeed that of Amun, as all the inscription on it clearly indicates. The feminizing aspect of the belly can be found on several post-Amarna statues of Amun and show that it is merely a type of stylistic execution of a male belly and not an indication of the presence of a female figure. If there is no representation of Hatshepsut to look for here, the second statue preserved in the complex will prove much more interesting for us. It can be found in the room immediately to the south of the house, here in green. This statue is not the most beautiful object ever discovered at Karnak, but it is nonetheless a very interesting object, as we shall see. The statue, in fact, shows something that we have already observed twice, an erased inscription from which only the name of Amun has been preserved. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the characteristics of Hatshepsut's monument. The statue also shows on one side of the throne where the representation of the schemata has been completely erased, whereas it has been preserved on the side with the representation of Amun. This object was originally a dyad of Amun and Queen Hatshepsut. The part devoted to Hatshepsut was readapted by removing the royal figure, which has been reworked into a representation of Lettuce. In contrast to the Amarna destruction, where they did not envisage that the object could be used again, when Hatshepsut was removed, objects dedicated to a deity, such as this dyad, were readapted so that this part of the object could continue to be used while removing reference to Hatshepsut as king. The motif of the lettuce was chosen due to its association with Amun to transform the object into a statue of the god alone, as there were evidently no intention to retain a royal representation here. This object, therefore, comes from another monument and was brought there when the room was built because it could not fit through the door. This means that the representation of Hatshepsut had already been modified and that the object readapted when it was installed. A second clue that images of Hatshepsut were already removed when the Contra temple was built can also be found at the base of the two obelisks. Representations of Amun in high reliefs are preserved on blocks belonging to the lower part of the obelisk. This implies that these representations were not accessible during the Amun-Ra period, as they were hidden by the walls of the Contra temple. Next to the high relief representation of Amun is a suppressed representation that can only be a king, in this case Hatshepsut, who would therefore have been suppressed before the construction of the Contra temple. The pyramidion of this same obelisk on the right side of the screen shows that all the accessible parts were the subject of destruction of the representation of Amun that were later restored. I will now end this tour of the monuments of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III at Karnak with a little-known sector of the temple consisting of 8 rooms called the northern storeroom of Thutmosis III. This sector of the temple is one of the most recently completed projects of the Franco-Egyptian Center, and as you can see here on the cover of the study, which is due to be published in the next few weeks by the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology in Cairo. You can see from this view that it is a long monument that runs along the entire northern side of the sandstone Temple of Amun. On this view, from the west showing the entrance to the complex, you can see that these rooms are not very impressive today because they have lost part of their elevation on their roof. Another view here from the east showing the rooms along the temple sandstone enclosure of Thutmosis III. Based on the access to the rooms, we can distinguish 4 different groups here. You can see to the east that between the last room in blue and the room in purple is the solar sanctuary of the Armenu, which we have already mentioned, and which divide the complex in 2. However, the last room to the east is necessarily linked to the others, as they share the same access. In fact, all these rooms can only be accessed from the north or the south via the corridor around the temple as presented here. They take their names from the fact that part of the rooms has a raised floor. It has sometimes been thought that the lower part might have had a role similar to that of the crypt, and that they were therefore storage spaces. However, if we compare the altitude of the floors of each chamber with that of the Middle Kingdom temple, we quickly realize that these chambers were not founded on the podium, unlike the Armenu or the Palace of Maat, and that they were therefore flooded for several months a year during the Nile flood, not by the flood itself, but by seepage water. The lower part of the rooms were therefore partially submerged, and it would be difficult to imagine placing objects in there. And if we look at the decorative programs from these rooms, we can see that they are decorated with cultic scenes, and there is no reason to consider that they are anything other than a cultic space dedicated to Amun. Those raised floors were probably a protective measure against floodwater, as the podiums on which other monuments of the reign were built are. These rooms also display a rich decorative program, on which I have selected 2 examples here. The first on the left of the screen consists of 2 scenes from what is known as the foundation ritual, while the right-hand side shows an extremely rare scene, which only attestation dating from the reign of Thutmosis III exists to date. This cycle shows various stages in the recording of the ruler's annal during his first Jubilee ceremony. I'm now going to focus on one particular scene within the complex, because this scene is not unrelated to Queen Hatshepsut. Although, as I said earlier, this monument is clearly the work of Thutmosis III when he reigned alone after the death of the queen, and it can probably be placed in the second phase of work at Karnak after the Amenu. Nevertheless, it mentions an event from the beginning of the autonomous reign, the consecration of a new bark for Amun-Ra. In fact, the bark used during the joint reign with Hatshepsut was in her name, and Thutmosis III, at the beginning of his autonomous reign, therefore had to use this boat in the name of the Queen Pharaoh, even after her death. However, from the year 23, that is very shortly after her death, he had a new boat made. In fact, the boat from the joint reign with Hatshepsut is depicted several times in the Red Chapel and elsewhere, but this small-scale representation only shows the iconographic skeleton, in other words, the parts that are most relevant to the representation of the boat, which seems almost devoid of any decoration. But another example from the reign of Amenhotep III on the third pylon, also at Karnak, where the representation of the bark extends to a large part of the pylon, shows that it was very richly decorated. Here is a detail of the representation of the hull, which was decorated with offering scenes featuring the king. This divine vessel was a particularly important decorative space, as it was one of the areas where the royal power was expressed outside of the temple, which was only slightly accessible, whereas this boat travels on the Nile in front of the crowds taking part in the various processions of Amun during the year. The bark made during Hatshepsut's lifetime must also have been very richly decorated, whatever carved directly into the wood or added to the boat in the form of metal plate, a decoration that most probably bore the name of the two kings. Replacing the bark with a new vessel in the first years after the queen's death, therefore, had a dual purpose. As well as being a pious act for the deities to whom this bark was offered, a new vessel made it possible to dispose of the old one and of the names and images of the Queen Pharaoh that were on it. I shall not pursue this discussion any further concerning the northern storeroom of Thutmosis III, which, although much later than most of the monuments at Karnak that I just mentioned, nevertheless take us back to Hatshepsut. Of course, there are many more monuments from the reign that I haven't addressed for lack of time, not to mention the many studies at Karnak devoted to monuments that were not built by these two rulers, but provide a better understanding of the temple and therefore shed light on the Thutmosis part of the temple in the process. I hope that the few elements I presented here today have given you an initial glimpse of the activities of Hatshepsut and Thutmosis III at Karnak through the result of recent work in the temple and by anticipating a little about those who are still to come. I will conclude with this last image and point out that you can find most of the document I have presented this evening on the Karnak project website, a project to edit all the inscription of the Temple of Karnak carried out by the Franco-Egyptian Center at Karnak and the University of Montpellier with the support of the CNRS and the LabEx Archimede. I thank you all for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Sébastien, for this wonderful lecture and super interesting for us and relevant for the collection, the Turing collection, of course. We are all the time, we are trying to look for the provenance and the original context of the statues that are here in the collection. So this was really very interesting. Before opening the stage to the public for the questions, I would like to start with one, which is, do you think that the statue that we have of Thutmosis III could be from the chapel that you showed in the Akhmeno, the one dedicated to the cult of the king?
It did definitely have the right aspect, and I will say the right dimension also. If I recall correctly, it's a statue with a very specific name, epithets of Thutmosis III in it, from the prenomen of the king, which is also related to the north of Egypt. It could come from Karnak, of course, it's coming from Thebes, as we know, but this will work pretty well with the fact that I showed two rooms, if I recall correctly, one to the south and one to the north. And inside the room, the decoration is also linked to the topographical position. So yeah, I did not include it here, but I was thinking of a statue also. I'm considering it at least. Because as you are trying to find original location of your objects, we are trying to put back object in the temple at Karnak, so maybe we can share ideas on this one. But I would not exclude it at that point.
That's very interesting indeed. We know from a Rifod journal that he was excavating in the northern area, in the area of the Temple of Ta, where he found like 19 black granite statues, and so probably all the standing segments that we have in the Turin collection. But then we know that he was working in the eastern Karnak, and then also in the Temple of Mut. But so the eastern area will could fit with this.
But we have to be careful also because some of the statue move a lot, or object move a lot also in antiquity, and he may have found it also in the north of the temple. For example, today in the Temple of Ta, there is a now standing of Amenemhat I, which came from the Middle Kingdom courtyard. There's no discussion from its original location, but it was found there by August Mariette when he first excavated the temple. So maybe they move around some of the objects also.
Yes, of course. So are there any questions? Ci sono domande dal pubblico? Sì?
Sorry, I'm not an expert, I'm just a fan of Egyptian culture, so the question might sound strange. I've heard for the first time from you that Hatshepsut started erasing some of her images even before. But I also read that Thutmosis III erased more or less everything after many years after her death. Can you tell me why? Do you think that?
So, you're perfectly right. As I said in my presentation, but very quickly, the question of the date of the erasure of Hatshepsut's name during the reign of Thutmosis III is not completely solved. The main idea today is that the names of the queen were erased only 20 years after her death, and that's exclude revenge or something like this, or hatred against the queen. This is an idea that is linked to some archaeological elements, or some, should I say, architectural relations of monuments in the Temple of Karnak, which is not so heavily proved today, and there is other elements that shows that traces of animosity against Hatshepsut may have erupted a long time before this. So most of the people think Hatshepsut was a nice person, which only wanted to do good to Thutmosis III, and that she was benevolent and things like this. This is an idea developed maybe 30 years ago in the USA. I'm not quite sure this is the right way we should look at Hatshepsut. She is nor gentle nor mean, because this is an ethical category which don't fit this situation, but it's a political situation, and she, as we can see on this monument, it don't help Thutmosis III to be erased from the space he was carved in, and it don't help Thutmosis III to lower his position in any monument. So when she is the king, we can say, okay, she wants to be there, it's normal, and there is a strange relation between them. But before she became king, this is only because she wants to be there. So the idea is that, yeah, Thutmosis III was not very happy about the legacy of King Hatshepsut after her death, even if in the first moment after it, as I said, he buried her, and he has to use the object in the name of Hatshepsut. Because if you think of the temples, most of the temples had gigantic cartouches of Hatshepsut everywhere, and almost none of his own name. And of course, this situation don't stand, I think, for 20 years. It was a long answer, sorry.
Well, thanks so much for this beautiful presentation of my beloved Karnak. And so dense, despite I know the site quite a bit, but so much information. I've been mind blown by the depth maps,
Yeah.
and the possibility to start and see things that we didn't know were there. So do you think that can be applied on already existing photographs, or they, like monuments, need to be recaptured so that that technique can be applied? And do you reckon we're missing out a big chunk? Because you're a wizard of recarvings and things that I can't see, and you spot them immediately. But still, do you think there is so much that we have missed so far, and with that technique we could start and see?
It's not that we can see something that we couldn't see before or with our own eyes, but it's that we can see it very clear. It's super easy to see it on the photograph, but it was possible to see that there was some signs on the table. But where this technology is really impressive is for traces of recarving. And for example, there is a recarving almost on every monument of the 18th dynasty, not only by the erasure of Hatshepsut also, of course, but because there is this gigantic destruction by Akhenaten. And sometimes the restoration made later by Horemheb or at the beginning of the 19th dynasty is so well done that you can tell that something is wrong, because there is pieces of the scene or the inscription which don't fit exactly where they should be. But it's really, really difficult to follow the traces of this erasure. And this technology makes it very simple to see them, because you will have the deeper part of the scene with a specific color on the rest of the scene, the first layer of decoration, with another color. So it's very easy, and you can sew it like this. So it's opening, I think, a new dimension in the way we are looking at the temples, because we can start back most of the drawings we made before, epigraphic drawings, as we have no new clues to recarving, which were only eyes-based, as you said, and which sometimes can elude us, because sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't, and it depends. What is possible to do with this technology is to use some of our older material in Karnak, because we are producing orthophotographs pictures since maybe 10 years now. Orthophotograph picture is real definition pictures made of a collection of maybe 200, 2,000 pictures. You took 2,000 pictures and you have only one very big picture, very heavy picture, that you can zoom in a lot. So for walls that have already been done with this technology, we can reuse the photograph that we kept in the archives to produce new depth maps. But for every other type of pictures, the older picture or monument that are still to photograph, we have to do it on each monument, yes. Thank you.
Ci sono altre domande? Io ne ho un'altra. Concerning the destructions that Hatshepsut suffered, is there a way to date them? So to say they were done late in the reign of Thutmosis III, and if this is the case, if this is possible, what do you personally think of the idea that some of these destructions were maybe made by Amenhotep II when he was co-regent with Thutmosis III?
Thank you for the question. The co-regency of Thutmosis III and Amenhotep II is also challenged nowadays. I know there is people going for it, but there is also strong argument against it, so I'm not sure Amenhotep II ruled with Thutmosis III, maybe, maybe not. What we can say, Amenhotep II, he reused a lot of space cleared by Thutmosis III. So a lot of inscription of Amenhotep, some of the inscription of Amenhotep II are carved on space which were erased by Thutmosis III. This is quite clear, and we can find it in a lot of places. But we have no traces of direct erasure that we can be dated of Amenhotep II. He only uses empty spaces for his own inscription. But what is clear also is that if Thutmosis III erased, I think Hatshepsut everywhere, an image of Earth was still standing, he did not recarve anything or at least a scene in each of this erased inscription. He only carved something like an offering table or an object to perform a ritual when the scene has a function to a deity. He readapts the scene when the scene has to be used again. But when the scene is, the only purpose of the scene is linked to the king, for example, accolade, or I'm not sure of the word in English, but or an offering to the king or ritual to the king, these scenes are completely erased and there is nothing more carved there. What we can see also quite clearly in Karnak is that part of the recarving of this space happened after the Amun-Ra destruction. So some of the image that you can see today, I don't speak about this today, would be a subject of another presentation. Some of the image that you can see of Thutmosis II or Thutmosis I in the place of the decoration that was previously the one of Hatshepsut, some of them are carved after the Amun-Ra period. This is quite interesting, but it's another subject on this. For the dating of the erasure during the reign of Thutmosis III, as I said, there is a debate on this issue. And there was an hypothesis which was published, I think, in 1966 or something like this, about this delayed destruction of Hatshepsut. And now it's the main theory about it. But I'm not so sure, or I'm quite sure, that the architectural idea that prove this late dating is not working at all, because it's linked to the annal chambers in Karnak, And there is a confusion where the date is, and the confusion also that the date is not the date of the decoration, but it's the date of an event referred to in the decoration. So there is something that will change, I think, in the next 5 years, if I get the time.
Thank you. And we have an online question to you as an expert of Hatshepsut. And was there a different way of representing or describing yourself outside Egypt, outside of Egypt?
Oh, it's a good question. Sadly, we don't have any witness of monuments of Hatshepsut outside of Egypt. There is nothing even from Nubia, except from the Temple of Sebbene, on Buen, and things like this. Yes, there is some temple in Nubia, but they are exactly the same type of depiction of the Egyptian monument. But there is nothing from the Middle East, for example, or Asia, or things like this. So, no, I won't say that there is different type of representation of Hatshepsut. What we can say is that we have the same type of representation in Luxor area and in the Nubian temple. So I would guess the representation was the same almost everywhere.
Ok, thank you very much. Altre domande? Perché sennò io ne ho una ultima. Vado io. So you were saying about the text on the red chapel that it wasn't meant to be for legitimacy. And you connected the text on the red chapel with the scene that we have seen on the 8th pylon. The one where Thutmosis I is actually legitimizing the reign of Hatshepsut. And I think that scene looks like a monumental legitimization, act of legitimization. So how do you put these things together? Also thinking that Thutmosis I was in a way used by Hatshepsut to legitimate herself also in the Temple of dell'Egitto.
Thank you. It was a provocative sentence, and I'm happy that you respond to it. The idea of the inscription being propaganda, or the scenes being propaganda, is also the main idea that you can find in most of the publication. But there is a problem with this, is that we are seeing the kings in Egypt, and Hatshepsut in particular, but not only her, with a modern eye. And we think that a ruler of any kind has to prove something to his population, or has to be popular, or has something like this. In Egypt, the king is a god on earth. So when you are king, you are the king. And nobody has to be convinced in the crowds that the king is the son of the deities and that they have the special abilities to do anything they do. This is an element of definition of kingship. But we have this huge narrative about Hatshepsut's accession to kingship. She's not the only one to do this. We have other narratives of this kind for other kings, not only this one. And what we can say about the text of Hatshepsut is that this text were not easily available. To get in front of the Red Chapel would be the privilege of maybe a very, very, very few amount of people. And in these people, you have to be literate, of course, to read the text. This is one point. But you have to have a very high level of understanding this text, because the text is built with a very high level of language. They are trying to make, to forge a language of art in this type of inscription, not only Hatshepsut of course, but not only her, which can be read of course by some people, because if there is someone to produce this text, there is someone to read it. But these people were likely to work in the inner center, in the prime circle of the power, and did not have to be convinced of what happened on things like this. But what these texts tell us, this one and the other one, is that there is part of monuments completely dedicated to the narrative of the king accession or the king action that do something that it's amazing or have never been done before. And the idea behind it is that they want to carve it on this monumental support, not to be known, because it's not the easy way to be in contact with your population. The easy way will be from other type of object, of media, of people. But to be carved in this monumental object to travel through history, to attain eternity, which is one of the motifs Hatshepsut is always talking about in her inscription. She thinks only of posterity. She's not the only one. Every king is making a monument for eternity.
Yeah. But I was thinking not of legitimation in front of the people, not at all. I was thinking of the need for legitimacy towards the very high and powerful elite of the priests of Amun, and towards Amun itself, towards the god.
Yeah,
because we are inside his temple.
Yeah, of course. Do you think Hatshepsut was able to be a king without the support of the inner circle of the power? Do you think it's likely that someone which is so outside of the box could be the king if she don't have any kind of support during the reign? And but your question, you are right, is based on the idea that there was an opposition.
She needed that.
But there was an opposition to Hatshepsut becoming a king that we have no idea of. There is no traces of any kind of opposition to Hatshepsut becoming a king. There is traces of the destruction of her memory afterwards, but it was afterwards. And for 13 or 14 years, she ruled Egypt as a king, and she started to rule it before, of course. And for all this time, from every document that we have, there is not a single traces of any kind of opposition. And the high priest of Amun will not be convinced only by an inscription carved in the temple. But carving an inscription on a wall will make it possible to read it through generations.
I hope to continue this discussion.
Yeah, I would like very much.
Dinner. So thank you again to our guest.
Thank you again for the invitation.
And thank you everybody for attending.